Hello.
Hey Akash, good afternoon.
Hello.
Akash, we had the discussion with E about the Verify vulnerability report. Is there non-internal topics related to vulnerability report to be added to the agenda today?
Um, I guess we could discuss the signature topic we were talking about, or do you think that's internal?
Oh yeah, we can ask about the user scenario,
Yeah,
like whether multiple, like whether they would use the same key to sign the SBOM. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I also want to discuss with E about like, so we have the uh, package requirement and the license requirement, but yesterday we started talking about whether people would actually provide like a static list of allowed packages with their version. Like I feel like that's too much to do, so we should confirm with him on that as well.
Mhm.
So let me start sharing process. Um, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Thanks for confirming. Cool. So on our pull request list hasn't really moved much since last week. Akash, what do you think about the stale PR? What is our process in general if we don't hear back from the customer or from the contributor?
We've actually had this happen before once, and what I did was I had like two different follow-ups, so I'll follow up one more time and tag them. Maybe it just got lost in their inbox. Wait another week, and if not, I'll close the PR and tell them that, hey, like, please reopen it, once you can revisit, maybe. That's what I did last time. So,
Sounds good. Did we have like a stale tag of any kind? I just, yeah, can't remember clearly.
yeah, that's a good point. We might, I'm not sure. Can
But
check if it's
I don't really know, like other than labeling the PR as stale, that is more obvious that it requires more attention. But cool, yes, please ping him again. And is this his first contribution for the repository? Just
yes.
wondering. Okay. So then got it. Cool. And PR 1123. Akash, we were saying we're waiting for the other version of the prototype.
Yes, yeah. So actually I have so this PR uh, is isolated to the work I'd done previously on the first version. The second version of the prototype, I haven't actually created a PR because it's mainly focused on the Rego policies, and that I've added to the document. So we could potentially go over that, and thanks for everyone who's already left some comments on that. But yeah, right now for this PR, today I kind of went back and added blacklist CVE support, and then I'm starting to kind of look into, if we did go down this route, how are we going to support like Vex document filtering? But I haven't actually implemented it yet. So
Got it. So is that something we want to go through today or maybe next week?
I can kind of introduce it this week, and then if folks could just look more closely in the document, and then we can discuss it again next week.
Yeah. Could you add a link to the agenda
Yes.
in the meeting notes? Thanks. Just seeing if Juncheng is on the call right now. It's not here yet, but I see his PR 1150 is in progress. 1151, the chart updates to allow multiple notation cert. This one, I just made it. It was in draft mode yesterday, and I just pushed another change, and it's now ready for review. Just quickly go through the high-level changes. So this is like a chart update. It'll create like a new value for notation certificates, and I've added note about deprecating the single certificate helm value. And then I've updated our end-to-end test to use the new property. And there was some refactoring in the helm templates as well. So it's a pretty small change. The customer did have a follow-up question on the issue that I want to discuss, or issue 1145. I sent him a link for the draft PR, and it confirmed that it is what it's looking for. But he did mention like use cases with the namespaces and what is the, I guess, how can he use registry scope? So Binbin, so is registry scope where you can potentially match certificates with the registry name?
The registry scope is using matching the image. Yeah, it's matching the image. Yeah, it's not related to search.
But the trust store we're matching registry with the trust store, and then the trust store has references to the validation cert, right?
Right.
So Binbin, in our case, does it actually do anything? Because we only have one trust store, right?
Right. Currently, we only have one trust store, which is like some like CSS.
Got it. Okay.
How should we recommend the customer? Like, what would they use the registry scope for? But we can think about this one. But it's a good question. Like, I'm not 100% sure about registry scope, and I looked at it like, yeah, we haven't, like, we just specify like a star. Like, do we have a use case for it? In the notation Ratify integration. And then he mentioned like defining namespaces. So maybe Binbin, he have a use case for different namespace. Perhaps like we can reach out to explore his multi-tenancy user scenario.
I feel like for the registry scope, one use case is that we want to have multiple verifiers. And this was mentioned by Xinhe before.
Yeah. So if they specified, like if they had the trust store and verifier matching, then they can define multiple verifiers and have their rego policy determine which one should.
So one case is that maybe it's not related to the trust store, but it's related to some like the trusted identity. And this was a case raised by E before, and I think we already support that, because like we can have a different like registry scope, and for each registry scope we have defined like different trusted identity, and then that would mean that we have two different verifiers, and for those two different verifiers, it's something like they are defined for two different teams because each team will have their own identity.
Yeah, and they would need to specify in their, like if they had a rego policy assigned to say namespace A, they in that rego policy they would say this verifier must succeed.
Yes.
Something like that.
Right. Maybe it's not about the multi-tenancy, it's just about the multiple teams. But yeah, in the future, if we have multiple, like if we support like multi-tenancies, and in this case, in Rego policy, we don't need to distinguish between the teams because we should define the policy under each namespace.
Yeah. Yes, and at the moment, the customer would need to specify which one should succeed versus which one should fail in their policy.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Would you be able to summarize that and post it to like how to use this today? To this
Okay, yeah. I remember I have an issue checking that. Yeah.
E, you have your hand up.
Yes, we are talking about this registry scopes, right?
Yes.
Actually, so I think even in the multi-tenancy case, I mean, namespace, each team has their own namespace. In that case, it is also could be that the team want to verify images, right? The images it could come from different registry or even same registry, different repository. So different images could be signed by different identity, as Bingbing just explained. So I think for namespace level or class level, it's similar scenarios. I mean, the images could signed by different identities, so user needed to configure different policy respectively. Although in the multi-tenancy case, it is not likely that there will be different trust identity that team need to verify, but still possible, I think, for big company.
Yeah, thank you, E. And one verifier can only point to one trustor. It's not an array of trustor. Is that correct?
Trustor from the configuration, at least from notation point of view, trustor could also be a list.
Okay. So I can have like, I trust these 5 identities and I pass it in the array and the verification will succeed.
There are actually two parameters. One is trust identity, another is trustor. Trustor stores the root certificate. If we are using the CA issued certificate, normally it stores the root certificate from the CA. The trust identity specify the identity that assigned this image, because the same root certificate can sign different sign certificate. So with the root certificate and then the trust identity, we know who we can trust and we can verify it. And these two parameters are both, at least from a notation point of view, it's a list.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks for confirming. Yep, so we will summarize it for and post it to the customer. I wonder if we need to also include this in our docs. like this is the first customer that actually asked about registry scope, but do we have any guidance today? Or I guess we just have a link to the notation documentation. In that case, I think we're covered.
I think we will use we will provide the building regular policy, right? And just like we discussed about vulnerability or spawn file, we have a building regular policies, right? And the customer only need to care about the parameters that they need to specify. So in the case we just discussed, so for some scenarios, customer needed to fine control the scope. So we could have this registry scope so that the customer can specify. If not, by default, it's all the images right. And also we provided this trust identity and trust store that user need to specify in order to make this policy work. So I think we can try to simplify the process that the user needed to configure a policy.
Yeah, so that's a good discussion point. What kind of policies to provide? At the moment, maybe Binbin can add more, but at the moment, our policies are pretty simple. The basic policy is we've configured these verifiers, and the verifying report evaluated to success. And when we support, say, the vulnerability verifier, the user would still, like, if we choose to implement specific verifiers, like as plugins, the user would configure the verifier, like, let's say, no high severity vulnerabilities. And then the regular policy may not change, because the regular policy would just say, I'm looking for success or failure. But we're not set on which direction we're going, but it's to be discussed. Is that the state, Akash?
Yeah, I think that's the state we're at. I think just to give people more context, because it's like a little bit confusing on what do we mean by verifier report, multiple. Yeah, so the way Ratify works now, let's just take it in the context of like a single notation signature attached to your image, right? And we want to enforce that every single image that's attached, every single image that comes across Ratify is signed by at least one valid notation signature. So that translates into basically two phases. So the first phase is when you set up Ratify, you're going to install your notation verifier. And inside the notation verifier, that's where you'll have your trust policy and trust store set up and documentation there. And you also link to your certificate store, which has the certs in it. So that's what will set up all the identities as well as which certs that you actually trust. Now, on the other side, that verifier is only responsible for looking at a single signature. So from that notation verifier's perspective, it's going to get a single artifact, a single signature. It's going to output an is success result, true or false, on whether that specific signature evaluates to true or false. Now, that one operation that the verifier does generates a single verifier report. So when we talk about a verifier report that gets sent back to Gatekeeper, each one of those reports corresponds to a single verification operation on a single artifact. So at the end of the day, once you complete all your verification operations on a single image, you could have a list of verifier reports. And so that list of verifier reports, then you need to create some sort of aggregate policy on top of that to determine your overall success value for the image. And that's what the Rego policy does currently. So the Rego policy is literally goes through every single report and it checks, hey, for every single verifier report that Ratify sent back, is the is success field true? And if it's not, then it's going to error out. So it's a very, very simple policy right now. When we introduce other artifacts, like let's just take vulnerability reports, for example, you're going to have multiple reports that get generated depending on what you want to actually verify. So if you have a single vulnerability report attached to your image, the vulnerability verifier could apply all of the the filtering rules like severity filtering, blacklist based on CVE, maximum age requirements on the verifier, which would mean that the user would configure those settings where you set what is the max age I want, what is the max severity I want. You do that on the vulnerability verifier CRD. And then at the aggregate, and then at the aggregate level, which is the Rego policy, you'd say, hey, I want to make sure that I have at least one vulnerability report attached to this image, and I want to make sure that that vulnerability report is valid. So you check, okay, first, I want to make sure I have an artifact that generated a verifier report of type serif.json, and the is success value is true. And then I will check all of the reports. The Rego will basically check the reports for that criteria that you defined in the Rego policy. So hopefully that makes more sense. There's like two phases that go on right now. There's your aggregate meta policy application, which is at the Rego policy level. And then there's the individual artifacts that are being verified. And you could, in a sense, think that there's some more, filtering rules and policy that you're applying at the granular artifact level. So yeah, and I think this is like the current SBOM verifier YAML.
Sorry, this is a SBOM verifier, but it's clearer when we have the license checker. So for example, there's allowed licenses or disallowed licenses. The disallowed license, the content, the names of the license would be configured in the custom resource, which of kind verifier. And at the Rego policy, it's like, how do I evaluate the response Ratify sent back to gatekeeper to an overall allow the deployment or block the deployment a decision. Is that a bit clearer, E? That there's two levels of configuration?
Yeah. I just want to confirm that. So the Rego policy is actually quite simple, right? Just check kind of if something, then deny, if else, then allow, something like this, right? And the major logic is inside the verifier. The YAML file that's defined for the verifier, right?
Yes, what we allow and what we disallow is defined in the verifier. Yeah. And the
logic is in the verifier,
to gatekeeper. Yep. And gatekeeper would make the final decision.
I remember
based on the report and the Rego
yeah, since my internet connection is unstable, so I remember Bing did some changes previously that we have a pass-through, right? We also can use the Rego policy for evaluation, because previously we have actually two logicals. In the Rego policy level is quite simple, and the main logic to verify an image is inside the Ratify, and the Ratify just provided the results to Rego policy. Actually, there's no logic in Rego policy, right? And then later, Bing did some work that we can support both. One is pass-through, another is not. So I think with the new logic that Bing implemented, that it could be in the Rego policy, we have this logic, and Ratify just provided the data, right, as an external data provider. provide the data to the reg policy, and the reg policy have the logic to analyze the data.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think
this-
we.
Sorry, this goes straight into the discussion with the should Ratify just fetch the vulnerability report and then versus implementing specific verification inside the verifier. So go ahead, Akash.
Yeah, so let me share my screen. I think we're getting lost in kind of the terms here.
Yep. Okay.
If you could just make me host.
Yep.
I think Akash had a good principle on what is better suited for the actual artifact verification versus what could be accomplished through a rig or policy verification.
Just
Have I successfully made you host? Yes.
yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'm gonna just focus on the high level discussion of should we actually have logic inside the vulnerability report verifier to actually parse it and come up with and apply the filtering rules at the verifier level, or do we just do the pass-through mode all the way up to Rego and have Rego actually parse through the payload of the vulnerability report and apply the rules there. So just to like double click on what we were talking about before, the pass-through mode that Bin did a lot of work on, that is actually a pass-through of the verifier reports in their existing state. So previously, when you have your verifier report, you have your list of verifier reports, which we're calling the aggregate report list, which is from different verifiers. They each generate different reports, and then you have a large list of verifiers, and then you have to actually apply policy on top of that to come up with a single source of truth.
Decision.
Yeah, single decision point. That decision point used to be done inside of Ratify as well via a config-based policy provider, which was not very extensible. With the pass-through mode, now we can actually send up that whole list of reports to the Rego policy. But this conversation is actually even more granular. It's on the individual verifier reports that get generated. There's still some processing that happens under the hood in each verifier where that individual is success value that is determined based off of the verification of a single artifact from a single verifier. That is still processed at the verifier implementation level. That currently for notation is done via the notation verifier. It verifies a signature, and if it verified yes or no, that's what is success value determines. But for vulnerability reports, we could also do some more processing of the individual report, come up with an individual decision, which will be the verifier reports is success field. And then after that, you apply, you send upwards the decision for that single vulnerability report that you were verifying. And then at the Rego policy level, you evaluate your list of reports, and each report would map to a single vulnerability report. And then you define, you're only concerned with the aggregate decision value. So, okay, was there one report that returned true, or was there any report that returned true? So those aggregated decisions are made at the Rego policy level. Now, that is what we call our built-in policy. So this is what I had demoed a couple weeks ago, if everyone remembers. It introduces a new vulnerability report prototype, which does some has some built-in filtering based off of your image creation annotation, as well as a list of your disallowed severities. And I've linked the video here, so if you want to refresh, you could go back and watch that. So this verifier, if you can see on my screen, you define certain filtering rules here, like what is the maximum age that you want? What is the disallowed severity? And this spec here is what the user would configure to determine, okay, what are the different properties that I want to gatekeep by? And then based off of that, the vulnerability report verifier generates a verifier report, and then the is success value is indicative of applying all of these rules against that. So the built-in way is the verifier is actually applying all of these rules, coming up with the is success value in a report, and then sending that back up to Gatekeeper, and Rego is applied on that. Now, the second option is that we actually don't do any of this sort of rule configuration at the verifier level at all. So what that looks like is that you have a very generic artifact loader verifier. That's what I'm calling it for now. And it's basically a multi-purpose verifier where you tell it, okay, here are the artifact types that would match to this particular verifier. So for SBOM, you would have, SPDX type artifact type, or for Seraph, or for vulnerability reports, you would have the Seraph artifact type. And using that, it can tell, okay, so once I come across a artifact attached to the image that matches one of these artifact types, then I know that I just want to use the generic artifact loader, which will just grab the artifact manifest, grab the first layer in that manifest, download the blob content, and then just attach the entire blob content inside your verifier report. And the is success field in the verifier report basically means nothing. It just indicates whether or not we successfully fetched the artifact. So what this allows us to do is that no decision making is being done at the verifier level. It's purely a fetcher of content. And so the actual logic has to happen during the constraint template evaluation. All the steps for vulnerability reports include like verifying that you have the correct Seraph JSON schema. You also need to verify that if you have a valid Seraph report, what are the tools that you were used to generate it? Because there's no standardization in the format at the Seraph level either. So we can't support every single tool right off the bat with a single universal policy. So you have Trivy or Gripe would probably be the first tools we'd support. Then you need to check on how, for every single report that we come across of every vulnerability report artifact we come across, do we want to make sure that every single report is going to evaluate to true, or do we want to make sure that at least one of those reports evaluates to true? Most likely it's going to be one of those reports. You also want to do things like, okay, if there's VEX filtering enabled, this is where you do the actual VEX filtering. And then same thing with blacklist of the CVEs and the severity-based matching that we were discussing before. So just scrolling down, what this looks like is you have your artifact loader verifier here, and it's super simple. You specify, okay, what are the potential nested artifacts that could be attached to it? So you might have like a signature attached to it. And then you also can specify your filtering by date. I'm not going to go into exactly why this is needed here, because I think we're going to go down a rabbit hole with that. But just for now, just assume that we have to do this here for a particular reason. But if you look at the actual the Rego that you have to write in order to do all this filtering, it's actually quite verbose and fairly difficult to understand. But from a user perspective, if they wanted to specify like, okay, I want to disallow these severity levels, previously, we were specifying them at the verifier CR level, so at the spec level here. Well, now we don't do that at that level. We actually do it in the Rego level. So we say, okay, here are the list of disallowed severities. So it's equivalent. It's the same thing. And then based off of that, you can then apply your filtering here. So the main crux of it is this here. So you have your you're basically doing a lot of report scanning. You're checking you're parsing the actual schema using a built-in Rego function. You're checking the status of that. You're then iterating through every single report that has a matching artifact type. You're checking that the success field is true. You're then unmarshalling the JSON content into a value that you can actually query on, and then from there you're enforcing things like regular expression matching, so extracting the severity level from there, and then also checking, okay, is there the severity level exist in the disallowed severity level list. So that's what the constraint template does. So now all of the logic that was implemented in the first prototype for having a a built-in vulnerability report verifier is now extracted from there and is now stuck completely inside this rego here. So in some of the advantage of this is that it's now you kind of consolidate all of the policies at one level. That could be considered an advantage because now a user has a lot more customizability. They have a lot more ability to just change how they want to handle the parsing of the report in one place. Unfortunately, that means that it makes it extremely difficult to understand as well as to extend these templates. Like for this whole function is only doing the severity filtering, but we're going to have to use deny list filtering. We're going to have to do vex filtering as well, which is even more complicated. So in all likelihood, the constraint template is probably going to be 3 times the size. And if someone has to go in and actually, update some fields, even if they're only updating fields, it may be confusing for them to be like, what is all this extra stuff and why do I need to understand what it is?
Yep, Sajay has a comment on can this be uplifted to a CI pipeline? Go ahead, Sajay.
Yeah, thanks for. I think Ratify can execute as a CLI. Is it possible for whatever you've done here in such a way that you can execute as a part of the CI pipeline and upload a signed attestation saying, hey, by the way, we've done all those checks according to this policy, and this rego might have a hash, or you sign with some indication of some provenance of what this policy is. And then you Ratify, all you do is do a verification existence report and its timeliness that it's fresh rather than going through this. Because this is, first of all, pretty expensive, right? Like you're going to have to do a lot of it. So is it, the point is, I don't think we need, at least what I'm trying to say is, I don't see Ratify as a Kubernetes only solution, right? It's more about how do you provide a solution where somebody can do this thing in parts, and yet it's something that we can help them compose with the tool set needed. So if you were to kind of like uplift this rego policy and enable Ratify as a CLI, that will do something like Ratify attach, but run these verifiers for me and just give me the attestation. So it's almost like a receipt saying it's all good. And as long as you have a signed receipt that along with the image, then you should be able to trust it, saying that this policy has already been pre-executed. And the policy can have a version or something like that that enables us to uniquely identify, but it's pre-executed and it has something of a timeliness or freshness of data in some form. Is that something that you considered?
I don't think we've considered that yet.
It might change the model in which this might execute, right? So, but throwing this to somebody and asking them to modify this is like very error prone and it's very hard to iterate.
Yeah,
right?
I don't think the point here is that I don't think this is a good way of doing it either. It's asking too much as a user.
Right. And so the thing that I think we can add value, right? Like here is give a building block that will enable us to aggregate a set of vulnerability reports, attach an attestation saying that, yes, this image is good for deployment according to your policy. Define what does that mean? Like if you have this rego policy as a way to say it, this specific policy has a hash with something that indicates what it is. And so according to this policy, it is okay. And we can use that to, if that claim is there, then we kind of do claims-based validation. So Ratify just moves as introducing a claims-based validator of a specific artifact type. So we can write what you did up there is the one above, right? Like where you say you have a generic artifact fetcher, and instead of a application set of JSON, you can say an application vulnerability attester or a set of vulnerability attester document, and you can enforce that it has a claim of some specific fields, that this is the policy and this is the identity or something like that. And then maybe that might be the way you break it up, where all this is pre-processed and you don't depend on a runtime to do this and make this extra complex. I don't know, just throwing out there, because I know once we go down this path, it's very hard to kind of like deviate. But it clearly means that Ratify becomes two things now. It's the CLI that you can run in the pipeline, and you can attach an image using the Ratify CLI, and it's got the policy evaluator that you can evaluate in Kubernetes as what we have done before.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that would simplify things a lot, but it wouldn't completely remove policy aspects even at admission time, right? We'd have to consider things like you're saying, the policy hash checking to, your time the attestation was created, and make sure that you have some sort of policy set for that on what threshold you're willing to accommodate, things like that. So it's like you have policy applied on the individual artifacts, and you create some sort of attestation based off of that, and then you have policy on the attestations too at deploy time instead.
Yeah, he has his hand up, but before I kind of yield, I'm thinking maybe writing a generic attestation validator, like an in-toto validator, but building on top of what you have in terms of vulnerability reports to produce the required attestations might be one way to kind of solve this. It's a more end-to-end solution, not just a one-place solution. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So in this page, Akash, this Rego-based policy is the new option that you want to provide it, right? If I understand it correctly, what we are currently do is Rego policy. We have this built-in Rego policy, but it's quite simple, right? It's just like you said, evaluate the aggregate the report status, then make a decision. But the report result, this decision is done in Ratify, right? So in this case, we can cover the two scenarios as Sajid mentioned. One is in the Kubernetes. In the Kubernetes, they can from the gatekeeper, they can just have a very simple Rego policy, and then the major logic is inside Ratify. And another case is not in the Kubernetes, maybe in a CI/CD, because Ratify have this major logic, right? It's just provide the results. Then there is another checker in CI/CD just to verify the results that Ratify provided. So if we move to this Rego-based policy, I mean, in this page, the current screen shared, that means all the logic is moved from Ratify to this Rego policy. Then with this change, we cannot do it easily for the CI/CD case, right? Because all the policy logic is inside the Rego. Then inside the CI/CD needed to have some kind of a Rego policy, then they can trigger Ratify.
Yes, trying to unpack that a bit. So yeah, my understanding would be that you would, in your CI/CD pipeline, you'd actually use either option to generate this policy would, instead of generating a violation or a deny or pass value that gets sent up to the user, you'd run the Rego to actually generate the attestation, and then put the result of running this Rego in the attestation, and then at the Ratify time in cluster, you would just be verifying the attestation using a different set of a much simpler generic policy like you're talking about. So it wouldn't be specific to any sort of artifact or any sort of scenario. It'd just be like, is the attestation good? What is the time it was produced or something like that? So yes, yeah, the constraint template rego in Gatekeeper at the deploy time would be very, very simple and multi-purpose. The policy that you apply in your CI/CD pipeline, we would still need to kind of decide between these two approaches if we're gonna run, Ratify's in-house Rego engine to come up with that decision and use this very verbose way of doing it, or are we gonna implement like a built-in way of doing it?
Thanks, Akash. Another question is, even with this Rego-based policy, I think for advanced user, they can just, for example, we provide this Rego policy template. For advanced user, they can just modify this template. But I think for maybe for some normal user, they don't need to take care of this Rego policy. Maybe they just write some configuration in a YAML file, then that configuration can be combined with this Rego policy together, so that for normal users, they don't need to care the logic. They just think this building and not building this Rego-based policy is good enough. I just specify the parameter that I need to do. Then for normal users, they don't need to care about everything inside the logic you just shared. But for advanced users, they can modify the template to change some logic. I don't know whether it is possible for normal user. They just provided some parameter values, then it will be combined with this this list. They don't need to edit this or update this YAML file. They just need to provide another, just as your example in the previous solution, the building solution, just specify some value in the YAML file. Then that YAML file can combine with this Rego policy YAML file to produce a real policy.
Yeah,
I see.
that makes sense. Yep.
So the unit of verification, like Rego versus implemented in Go, I think, Akash, it's much more debuggable and easy to understand in Go from a testing and debug and maintenance perspective. Like I would prefer to have the validation logic in Go.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's another thing I want to mention, that the building policy, the current solution, right? We just leverage the Rego in a very simple way, but the other logic is inside. Ratify is maybe in a YAML file that is quite understandable. I think that is the benefits. But with that solution, we have two decision points. One is in Rego, another is in the Ratify side. So if some user want to customize this verification logic, they need to do it in Ratify, not in the Rego, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. When we introduced like the Rego parser or the like Binbin's change of the pass-through mode, I think the advantage for the advanced users where they want to author their own Rego, we can support that. But for the basic users, they don't need to understand the Rego. They can look at the configuration of the verifier and look at the implementation of the verifier, understand what's going on. But for a user that's not familiar with Rego policy, I'm unable to understand what validation is going on as well. I think it's the disadvantage.
Yeah, if from user point of view, it could be some simple logic in Rego, some other logics in Ratify, or we have all the logic in Rego. From user point of view, especially for a basic user, What I care is that I trust this kind of building policy. In general, I call it building policy because it is provided by Ratify during installation. No matter it is some parts in Rego, some parts in Ratify, I don't care. From user point of view, I just need to specify the parameter I want. I want to for example, the vulnerability report not older than 24 hours. I need to put this parameter, then the policy does the work. I don't need to care about that. But maybe for advanced user, they need to understand where is the analyze evaluation logic, because I have advanced logic for my own company. I need to edit some policies. For that part, we can provide this template. Then they can learn how to do it. If it is in Rego, they need to learn it in Rego. If it is in the Ratify YAML file, they need to learn how to change that. But I think for most users, I just want to, like they have this portal, right? I just need to specify who I trusted. I just want to specify from the vulnerability reports, it is not older than 24 hours, then it's enough. The rest will be the Ratify and the policy to do that.
Okay, so I think I kind of understand. So the goal is that we don't want to touch Ratify components to actually update these values, right? The goal is that we can just touch some sort of, either you touch the Rego if you're some advanced user, or you touch some sort of wrapper on top of this Rego, which is, I think, the YAML file that you're referring to, which will only have, these fields. These are the only configurable fields. A user can kind of go in and change those, and if they're only concerned with that, then that's good enough for them.
Yes. From user point of view, just the simple parameter they need to do, and they know this building will work for them, because we will have some document explain what the building policy will do for them, right? So they just need to specify the variable, then it's enough for them. For the advanced user, they don't think, for example, they think it is not enough for them, they can add an actual logic or modify this logic based on our template.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I see the desired experience. In terms of how we would do it, it's quite a bit of it's a different paradigm completely. And unfortunately, with our dependence on Gatekeeper here, I don't know how we would go about it, but we could definitely brainstorm that. But I think at least I understand the direction you're thinking of going now, Yi. So thanks.
And Sajay also.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, was Sajay?
Yeah, no,
yeah, go ahead.
I really want to kind of like see if we can do the pre-computation on the CI side, because then you don't have to deal with Gatekeeper, you don't have to deal with any of these request throttling issues and things like that, right? And they can have a different version. They can even customize how they attach these things. And if we supported something like even a plugin model in Ratify, they can, the verifier is anyway a plugin model, so they can bring in their own custom set of verifiers if they want to. And then as long as we give them a way to attest and attach the attestation, that would make things easier, even if we give them a pre-canned vulnerability report attestation attacher. So
Sajay, just to fill the picture here. So the role here that you would see is a service kind of like, so let's say we get a vulnerability report. Trivy generates a vulnerability report every day. It then the customer CI/CD pipeline will invoke like a service like notation that will make sure it runs the policy, the desired policy against that vulnerability report, and then do an attestation. And
yes,
that's what Ratify would just basically sort of verify, right? That the attestation exists.
Yes. And this thing can be run on Jenkins, cron job, GitHub Actions, with anything, right? And as long as they can run it in some timely manner, we can tell them that you run it on your CI with your keys, and then you can verify it how you want to, as long as the attestation contract that we require on the verifier is there. But we have to provide a pre-canned solution like what we're seeing right now, which is with the policy of how to do. And then we kind of like let them say that, okay, I'm actually okay with this vulnerability, right? And Maybe they want to attach another exception report or another set of report that indicates that the CV is okay for them, and then they can cross build that again. The reason why I want to avoid us breaking a runtime with an extremely complex policy is it's very hard to debug. You have to go to every cluster and debug this, which is going to be really, really complicated. Support is going to be a nightmare, in my opinion. So,
Yep, thank you, Sajay. We will explore the pre-baked idea. We'll think about it. And we have 5 minutes left. There was also another question that came up during the week that I want to discuss again, Akash. Yesterday we had the conversation. So currently you can configure Ratify with one, let's say you configure with one notation verifier with a single verification public certificate. Do you expect the image and the SBOM or the vulnerability report to have the same verification certificate? So you brought up a good point yesterday, like, does customers sign the image with key A and then, different signature for the SBOM and a different signature for the vulnerability report? Is that common, Sajay, Feynman, Shui?
I mean, if everything is one key, it would be nice. But the truth is, we already have a scenario where a customer from Docker might have their signature using cosign, or the other way around, right? Like if you're pulling from ChainGuard registry, then they'll have it on cosign, and then if Docker might have OpenPub key, who knows? And then your registry inside Azure might have ACR or might have notation. So the signature formats can vary, and I think the signature keys can also vary because of that, because there's no way they're going to use the same key to sign different images. The point is, I don't think it's unreasonable for somebody to want to deploy Nginx from Docker Hub or Nginx from public ECR or an MCR image for AKS and bring their own images, because they're not going to be able to attach signatures from their key, using their key into a public registry. So we need to have a way in which we can scope the signature validation for different artifacts, which indirectly means that for a given verifier, it might be in a similar model where the set of reports might be signed with a different identity altogether, which is indirectly a different key. So I think we should assume that the keys can be multiple at all points in time, even though if we don't do binding and we only have an array of one. That's my take.
Yeah. So then we realized, okay, we can configure multiple verifiers, right, that represent different keys, but we don't have a way of saying, make sure this SBOM was signed with this key.
Right. So I think the notation trust policy has done a lot of work, and Bin is here. We could potentially model after that similar, like there's a notion of a scope on which a certain identity or a certain key might be applicable. And as long as we can define that for this verifier, for the scope, this is the key, then it might be okay. So inventing a way to just bind the key with the artifact is kind of what I think we'll have to invent here.
Yeah. Thanks. So we've confirmed it is a valid use case, and that's something we'll have to think about.
That's just my opinion. Yi, what do you think?
Yeah, I think ideally from a company point of view, once I acquire the images, I generate attestations, I would like to sign with the one key so that it will be easy that in the later phase, the verifier just use one key. But thinking Ratify from open source point of view, there could be different cases, right, from different organization or users. So it's possible that there will be different key user want to check, but still from user point of view, it's a bit complex for them. So if we provide multiple verifier, it will provide this flexibility that user can do. But I think with one verifier, at least for now, it meets most scenarios, because from user point of view, I don't want to complex this situation.
I agree. Like we start with one, and then, but I think having a binding, a way to bind certain keys with certain scopes is is something that Ratify is missing and notation has, and we need to probably expose that somehow for a given artifact, for a given repository type scope. What's the key to use in some way? But again, we don't have to do everything at once. So
Cool. We're at time now. Any last topics or add to the agenda we can discuss more next week? Okay. If you have anything, just add to next week's agenda.
it is all
you,
really
everyone.
cool, really cool. So,
Yeah, really interesting discussion today.
all right.
Thanks for joining. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.